This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I'm your host, Jason Baum. With me, as always, Evelyn Coleman and Marcus Merrill. Thanks for coming back. And today we are lucky. We have a special guest. Joining us today is Karen Laiacona Frazier. Karen, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, Karen is the Senior Director of QA at Unqork, where she plays a pivotal role in shaping quality assurance landscape of the company. And she has been in the QA world for 12 years, was it, Karen?
Yep, software for about 12 years. I've worked in a few different parts of the SDLC now.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, welcome to the podcast. We're excited to have you because today we're going to talk about a pretty cool topic, I think, pretty timely. How CICD and QA can improve cybersecurity in SDLC. Wow. Yeah. That is a big topic.
That's not in the news at all, right? That's not everyone's notifications.
Yeah, right. Where to begin on a topic like this? Maybe that's the question, Karen. Where do we begin on a topic like this?
I think, we're all professionals, so we know that everything's on a timeline. And a lot of the crunches and compromises in software development come from some of those pressures. And we forget that we have to move more quickly, but we need to keep all of these new security threats in our minds as we're setting up our SDLC and as we're putting some of those toll gates under automation and setting up a CICD testing pipeline. Moving faster doesn't mean that there's less testing. It should mean that there's actually more toll gates in some cases.
It's interesting. You use the term toll gate a couple of times, and I'm curious what that means. I haven't heard that term used before. I can kind of guess. I would like to hear what you mean by that.
I use that term to, casually describe the gaps and space in between these systems that are interacting. It could be our own internal systems, our internal pipeline of promoting our code to build our application, or the testing pipeline and the code that lives within that for the different types of testing. Or I could use a different analogy to explain it as well. And instead of a toll gate, it could be, a door on a house, a structure. And really looking at the SDLC as the structure around the app development lifecycle and how that structure can provide a lot of security. It can have a really sturdy front door. It could have, automated lights, automated sprinklers if you don't like your neighbor's dog. It could have, all those things, or it can have none of them. It can, have a door that's left cracked open, right? And really looking at that structure and those doors, those toll gates as opportunities to strengthen or opportunities to provide, gaps in your pipeline.
I have a follow-up to that. I really want to ask this because I love the analogy. First of all, Marcus happens to be the king of analogy and metaphors. That is his thing. So you're stealing his thunder by having an amazing metaphor
Not a bit.
to start the show with. Had to call that out. But the house and the security of your home, I love that. I also feel like many people with their home security wait until an incident happens before they actually beef up their home security. Do you find that that's similar with cybersecurity and threats and SDLC?
You never want to wait until it's too late. And sorry for Marcus, stealing your thunder with the metaphor.
No thunder stolen. Do all the metaphors.
And you also don't want to give away too much information. Be careful who you give your address, right? We're all guilty of giving out too much information, and maybe to carry this analogy forward, giving out too much data in these transactions, giving out too many permissions in these transactions that you don't need to give. Does the pizza guy really need the key to your door, or can you meet him at his car? So all too often, these supply chain breaches, what it really is trusting a service too much with too much data, with too much permissions that were not necessary for them to complete that task.
Do you feel like there's a bit of a power struggle between maybe like development teams and QA teams who want to use services and want to use these different tools and their security departments? Because I found myself working with some customers where security makes a new policy without checking with QA, especially who has tools reaching into internal apps and things. And now all of a sudden, stuck dead in the water. And I can't help but wonder, after what you said, if being more proactive could, like, proactively, I'm saying this wrong, if you could be more proactive in QA and development in touching on security, that maybe could alleviate that power struggle. What do you think?
There's definitely a need for those departments to work together, because the security team is going to host the specialists and the folks who decide what tools are used and what those metrics and protocols are. But very often the QA team is who's implementing those tools on the project and who's reporting on the success of those tools on the different sprint endings. So they have to work together. It's necessary for that to happen. And in that, example, in that team structure I just described, wouldn't the QA team see those vulnerabilities first? It can't be a one-way communication between the security and the QA. The QA has to then go back to security and back to DevOps and tell them what they're seeing on these projects, as well as the support team, right? It has to be two-way communication, which I think is the only way to, get as advanced and cover as much as you can, is to recognize that there are people who can see more than you. You might be the specialist, but you have to use the tools at your disposal.
Yes, it's really interesting how this has evolved. I mean, a long, long, long time ago, before the earth cooled, when I got started in this industry, it was network infrastructure, open ports. People like, I don't know if anyone saw the movie Sneakers, like they're trying to break through the firewall and forge root level access. And I feel like to double down on the house analogy, that's the equivalent of going through the wall, when the truth is there's a text field that's asking for your first name, and that's a door straight to the database. Do you find that the threats are increasingly coming from, like, are we sort of balancing? Sometimes it goes through infrastructure, sometimes it goes through software, or is it both? Is it one more than the other? What do you think?
I think we are seeing just an overall increase in third-party services in software, right? People are embedding, all kinds of services to expedite their own process. As I mentioned, time and money overall. So there's going to be more of these services embedded, I think. And the frequency will just increase because of that. And if people are not knowledgeable at the time of implementation, or even, as folks are deciding which tools to use, there could be, an entire chain leading into that service that you might want to ask some questions about.
Yeah, I mean, as everyone here probably knows, like there was a 20-year period where every software package in the world pretty much had a cat door called Log4j that anyone could get into at any time. And the fact that it didn't cause more catastrophic implosions of software is phenomenal to me. And I'm wondering, as you get into the realm of third party as well as open source, like how many more of those vulnerabilities might there be out there right now, exposing us all to risk? I guess that's rhetorical.
You're sort of describing like reusable bad agents in a way. And from Unqork's perspective, and in recent years, how I've preferred to develop applications from reusable components to defend ourselves from reusable bad agents, we just try to flood our developers with reusable good agents, with ones that we have reinforced with extra design and testing and just overall safeguards. It's more than a shift left in testing. It's actually more like encapsulation. It's like wrapping your pipes, getting ready for winter. You're not just waiting to see how far you can turn your thermostat up. It's like real encapsulation at that point.
Mhm. And I wonder if you could quickly compare, contrast the challenges of working on a platform on which other people are developing software in mass, as opposed to you developing your own application to do business for a single company. What's that transition been like for you?
The first shock was that everybody was going to be on the same version of the application. So that frightened me, right?
Yeah.
And there are, downsides to that. The releases are major from the product and they're going to go to more people. So they have to be, tested rigorously. The benefits of that, though, I can repeat myself again. They are tested rigorously by many people at once. So you know that if you're using the first name component, that is probably a component that's in hundreds of other applications. And if there were a bug, that is more likely to be logged because everybody is on the same version. So there, is a higher stake when it comes to that type of release. And it was definitely a shift for me when I came onto this product team. But we also see those benefits, especially as we scale and more people are building their applications on the same platform.
In our neighborhood, we have a very safe neighborhood. So I'll preface what I'm about to say with that. With that said, there was a string of burglaries in our town recently, actually. And they were breaking in when people were home early in the morning, which is an unusual time for break-ins. And they were purely after one thing. They got in to get car keys to steal cars. And that was it.
One thing.
The one thing. And I feel like that, like using the metaphor, but like, do you find that sometimes it's hard to test for like this one scenario that maybe you're not actually secure for? Because maybe I don't have a car alarm. I did have a house alarm. House alarm went off, but my keys are right there by my door. They steal those. They still get your car. I'm just curious when we're talking about QA, how hard that must be to kind of anticipate. Obviously, that's all QA is, right? You're constantly anticipating. Maybe I'm answering this question for myself, but I would love to hear your thoughts on it.
Yes. Yeah. And it sounds like the burglar or their bad agent is willing to take a more high stakes move when they know they're after a high stake reward and then they can get out in time with it. And that's not going to be any different from, the physical realm to the software. Sometimes you cannot plan for that, but you can anticipate disaster and recovery. So is there a way that you can turn off access to that singular system and not turn off the function of your entire application and isolate that weakness, isolate that incident, isolate that recovery zone, and, maybe just allow your patrons to get to a certain point and then save in the application and everything else is still secure. And there should be something that the team can read about that ahead of time and implement and test. So right around the time of stress load performance testing, that might be, a good time to schedule some disaster and recovery testing because, worst case, that's what should happen.
You bring up a really interesting concept about like what happens at what part of the pipeline in terms of security testing. Do you have strong like opinions about what should happen at the beginning and where the security tie-ins are that you want to share?
So my best piece of advice is to not share all of the information about the security test until you have completed it, because you want to be able to reveal everything that will make the application better before delivery. And if there's some behaviors going on in your engineers or in your tools, you want to reveal them. That's the whole point of the test. So, I said at the beginning, no exceptions. No exceptions when it comes to the security test. We are going to test the login. I know that everyone does. We are going to test it, and we're also going to test it from these different locations, even though you don't have customers in those locations, right? So taking that no exceptions rule and knowing that vulnerability can be at any part, and you don't want to really give every system a heads up in this. So go ahead and go forward with your strategy the way that it is planned and take action on the results. You don't have to, describe your mastermind plan to everybody. That's not going to result in the best results, I don't think.
That's good advice.
So along those lines, what advice would you give someone in terms of like learnings? Cybersecurity is a whole career path. So for a tester who's a functional tester, automated tester, do you just say, go study the OWASP top 10, get familiar, or how do you advise people to learn to add this skill set to their arsenal?
That's a great question. I am not necessarily going to say, go get a 4-year degree in this. I'm going to more likely give somebody some, actionable items that they can complete in 6 months or so. There's some really great courses out there, but you mentioned, there's the top 10. I wasn't sure if you're talking about the CICD GOAT and the web GOAT. There's 2 applications that exist. One of them is a GitHub pipeline and the other one's a web application that have built in the top 10 vulnerabilities, and you can go through as a student and flag them. It's, a wonderful activity to find if this is something that you have the skill set for currently, if this is something you enjoy, maybe if this is something you want to continue, which is really the point, which is it's never ending. It's kind of like philosophy, right? You can go over the last 100 years of events, and that might not teach you anything about the next 100 years other than context. So knowing that you'll continue that education. But those are some, wonderful tools that exist. Yes, exactly. The one that Marcus.
Yeah, we should probably link. Yeah, that as well as the GOAT websites that Karen is talking about. They're fantastic for learning these things and really getting practical exposure to them. Yeah.
Yes. I think any individual will know from that experience if they need some more courses, if they are ready to dive in, and if they have that interest.
I want to go back to something you said and then go forward to something you said. So let's go back first. The no exceptions rule. That's really interesting to me because I have been doing this podcast now. I believe this is our 33rd episode of Test Case Now. I know, right? I cannot believe that it's like already 33. It's interesting because I've heard over and over and over again from folks like Marcus, from folks like Nikolai Avalokin, who's also a panelist at times, and Titus Fortner at times, and Evelyn, I believe you've even said this. It's all about risk, measured risk. And they've kind of said you can't test it all. At some point, you got to release, you got to push.
I think we usually aren't talking about security when we say.
I was going to say, I'm assuming is the one asterisk then security.
Yeah, it should be. When we're talking about all the types of testing, that has to be the minimum. I would say you have a wonderful team of developers working their hardest to implement these best practices. To have one piece of code go and circumnavigate and put all of that at risk, it just doesn't seem worth it. Maybe I would ask, why are your tests taking so long that you don't want to run them?
That's a great question. I just can't imagine like the app is built, it's released, it's out there, and it's like, oops, we left this huge back door open and someone's going to hack it and use it for bad, use it for evil, do something.
Evelyn seems compromised by this.
I'm trying to think because we're talking about an arms race between us and the bad agents, right? And so while there is some assumed risk that the button doesn't show up and we release anyways, that's one type of risk. That's like this accepted risk. But I think when it comes to security, and you can correct me, this is more about there's risk in not being able to adapt quickly. And so it almost plays into itself. If you are really, really tied up in the other types of testing, let's say functional testing as an example, right? And you're really tied up in that, you're unwilling to you're perfectionist, unwilling to do anything without releases, really tied up in that. Or you can have a structure in your workplace that allows you the flexibility to move quickly when the bad agents are winning the arms race. And so it is tied into the idea of knowing that some bugs are going to get through, and you're sacrificing that to give yourself the time and flexibility to do the things that are high risk and to handle those. So I don't think they're necessarily like one or the other. I just think that in order to have no exceptions and to be able to move quickly, you have to take the time out to make exceptions in other places. And doing that intentionally is important. I don't know if I made sense, just
That made sense. I'm going to turn it to Marcus because I feel like, Marcus, I really want to hear your thoughts on that, since you're the one that I hear possibly most often talking about measured risk.
Yeah, I talk about it so much because I feel like the testing profession has kind of lost its seat at the table because
We don't talk about risk. We talk about covering every typographical error and making sure that every single line of code is covered when we don't really prioritize that kind of thing. I was testing some software a long time ago where I said, basically, if you delete this file, then the whole site crashes and there's no way to get it back again. You have data corruption. Step 0, prize 0, we have to fix this right now. And someone was saying, basically, you have to have root level access within the firewall in order to get this done. So it is severity 0 in that it's true that it will crash the system, but it's priority 5 because, or just, the lowest priority, because nobody's actually going to do that. Absolutely acceptable risk to have that be the case. And the second thing I wanted to bring up was I wanted to ask Karen, do you believe and are you witnessing people asking more and more and more of security concerns from testers? Are you seeing that shift in the profession?
Yes. On the project level, there are more tasks for QA engineers that might be considered related to security or DevOps. They are going to be responsible for setting up the, CICD elements usually and hooking into those with different types of testing. Some of those are going to be pushed from their local. Some of those are going to be webhooks into other testing tools and systems. So the tasks for QA engineers have definitely experienced more range recently, as they are the ones with that skill set on the project, and typically the ones that have more time, especially as they can automate their tasks.
It's interesting because when I was sort of coming up in the industry, there was kind of a new concept at the time called like social engineering, where you would you would try to figure out someone's password just by impersonating the IT worker and saying, hey, I'm trying to reset your password, but I can't get it. Can you just tell it to me over the phone? And I remember reading an article a long time ago. I think I may have told the story on this podcast before, that companies that do that sort of white hat hacking, you hire them to break into your system. They don't do the social engineering anymore because it works 100% of the time. They've never not been able to break into a system by doing that kind of hack. So they don't even try anymore. To me, that falls under the category of we've just as a society accepted that risk when we push software out. So it is still a risk-based approach. We are, unfortunately, to your no exceptions rule, we are making an exception to that, but we're making it 100% of the time. So it's not really even an exception. It's part of the rule. That's my nuanced answer to the whole, it depends thing.
I'm sure that's true in many cases. Exactly. What you're describing, we've all experienced that to a T. I suppose in those cases, we might rely more heavily on monitoring and, rollbacks in those situations. How fast can you close that gap? So we're still talking about closing the gap and bringing the system back to a secure place. It's just at the caboose of all of the work that's been done.
Do you do feature flags at Unqork? You don't even say.
We do. Yes, we do feature flags. So that, I can explain to make sure that we're on the same, lines here, which means that we can do a major release behind a feature flag, and then different environments which want to enable that feature can request for it to be turned on. So it's a less high risk release in that case.
Yeah. It also allows you to build a rollback mechanism in. Yeah.
Yes.
I had said in my questioning before that I wanted to go back and then go forward in my questions, and I never got to go forward. And then Marcus stole my question because I was going to ask about evolution of QA with cybersecurity and threats as they evolve. I feel like you kind of answered that a little bit. So I'm going to ask a different question. What's like a common myth that you see about CICD in cybersecurity, about the connection?
The first thing that came to my mind is what I will say, which is the CICD will automate itself. It will set itself up. There's a person typically, but there's people behind setting up those pipelines, and they need to be given instructions and they need to be given criteria for success. So automation does not create itself, and those criteria do not create themselves either. Say February 1st, 2024, every project after this date requires this, draw a line in the sand, or implement it on all your existing projects as well, which might be harder to do. But there has to be criteria for the project in order for it to exist in the project. There's not typically extra things that get delivered by our very busy teams. So that is, I think, the biggest myth, that it will happen on its own, that since everyone knows it's important, since there's the executive order from 2021 that everybody takes this seriously. No, they don't. They're gonna look at the rubric that they are provided for the project that they are on. And when, all of that is tightened up, it will happen.
Are you ever surprised that people don't take cybersecurity more seriously? Like, how is it 2024 and people still don't take it seriously? I don't understand. I also don't understand how it's 2024. So there you go.
Yeah, I've worked in enough cafes to know that no one's taking it very seriously.
I also think the requirements for what taking it seriously are change day to day. And so, the things that I do today to protect my security, if I look back at myself 20 years ago, and I would not see myself doing those same things. The technologies weren't the same. And so I don't think that the consumers, or just like the day-to-day person, even the people building things, will ever, be on target to say like every single person is following every single best practice, because by the time the best practices come around and then somebody invents software to be able to do that easily, like the password stuff, we're on to the next thing. And you've just adopted that, and now you're already not taking it seriously, right? You're already behind. So I think some of it is just exhaustion, and maybe some of it is laziness, and some of it is just how do you stay on top of it?
Yeah. I was going back and forth in my head. I was like, I was kind of answering the question for myself. Like, well, how would I answer it? And I was just immediately drawn to, because it's hard. Because people don't want to do hard things, right? We're kind of programmed. It's hard. I'm going to skip that.
Leave that for last. Yeah.
I know someone who is very close to me who I've been encouraging to use a password like LastPass or one of them, and I can't do it. I just can't get them to use it. And I'm like pushing and pushing, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much you push. It doesn't matter how much you tell someone how at risk they are, because they use the same password for literally everything, in 2024.
Are you going to hack them and teach them a lesson?
I should. That's what. Well, no, I don't want to do that. But yeah, I probably should.
I've been hacked. I need to change my password.
One of the most, I think I've told this, now I sound like Marcus, but I'm pretty sure I've told this story on this podcast. But one of the coolest talks I ever went to was Frank Abagnale. It was the cool, Frank Abagnale's Catch Me If You Can. He is, Leonardo DiCaprio played him.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
So yes, Leonardo DiCaprio. Well, he's a real person, Frank Abagnale, and the story was real. Of course, it was sensationalized or whatever by Steven Spielberg, but it was still a great movie. I think the real story is even crazier. So Frank Abagnale, when I saw him speak, he is, first of all, a cybersecurity, he's a genius. He was able to hack in like 10 minutes Colin Powell. And he did it live. in front of everybody and went through, and he's like, all I need is 3 things to have your identity, right? He's like, I need your name, I need your address, and I need your social security number. And he's like, if I have those 3 things, I own you. And he basically went through and did it in 10 minutes, which was horrifying, absolutely horrifying. And then you wonder, well, gee, if he could do it that fast, how many others could do things like that? And what else can they do that we don't even know about? So when I think about that, I'm like, why again are we not taking it seriously?
Yeah, and there might just be some exhaustion or hilarity about it. I'm not sure if you've heard about the Fire Stick hacker recently.
No.
It was Rockstar
No,
Games
tell
that
us.
was and the victim, but he was under arrest and they had to travel, with him for some time. So they, confiscated all of his computers and this and that, and they wouldn't let him connect to Wi-Fi, and they had him in the hotel room, under arrest. And he hacked while he was under arrest for hacking the system. He hacked the system again with a Fire Stick that was left in the hotel room. And,
Oh my gosh.
that's not what we should be doing with our skill sets, but it was very impressive.
I mean,
I'm sure he has
Yeah.
a great job now at the CIA. I don't think they really got to their destination.
right? Right.
The hackers are more motivated. They have more time, and they aren't juggling the hacking with 10 other top priorities
Yeah, exactly.
like most software developers are.
Oh my gosh. This is such an interesting conversation. I want to keep going, but we don't have any more time. Karen, thank you so much for hopping on and having this conversation about cybersecurity. I'll be honest, anytime we have this conversation, I kind of always leave like, I'm going to go lock my doors. I'm going to go like turn on the lights. I'm going to go turn on the alarm system. I'm going to double check my passwords.
It's a good feeling to have, probably.
I guess it is. Yes. The OCD side of me appreciates it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And thank you for listening. As always, we really appreciate your time and spending it with us. We hope you had as much fun as we did, but probably not. We have way too much fun on this show. Until next time, this has been Test Case Scenario. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.